right, welcome everyone to the channel. You guys are in for a treat. As always, we're bringing quality content, informative content that is important to running your trucking business. And today is no different. And so this is a live recording, but if you're watching this on the replay, kindly put that in the chat. Let us know that's also how you're viewing the content so we can make sure that those questions that you leave in the chat are addressed at a later time, as a follow-up. And so with that being said, we're going to go right into our content. And so let me bring on our guest host. So we've got some eyeballs here. Feel free to also anytime
Hey,
during this to drop questions in the chat. Like I said, this is a live recording. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Yusuf.
thanks, Lotta, and good evening, everyone. My name is Yusuf Burgess. I'm Senior Advisor with Strategic Insurance Advisors. Strategic Insurance Advisors is a commercial insurance brokerage that helps its clients to find the right property, casualty, and surety bond programs for their businesses. We are very client driven, and one of our focuses is in the commercial trucking space.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So, you have the great honor of kind of co facilitating a very special guest. And so, we're going to go ahead and bring her on stage as we go deeper into this conversation about Texas workers' comp.
Yes, yes. Yes, I have the extreme honor of introducing everybody to Miss Robin Burgess, Esquire. She is an attorney with a focus on workers' comp and disability. Should I go through her whole resume, or just kind of give a little background about where she's been, or should I just let her do that?
It's totally up to you. I mean, just like I say, having a
Okay,
conversation. Robin's like, look,
okay.
she's ready. That was a great introduction, she said. So, I'm going to give it back to you guys.
Yeah, so welcome this evening, Miss Burgess. Would you like to kind of give a little bit of intro to yourself? I'll allow you to go ahead and do that.
Thank you so much. As indicated, my name is Robin Burgess. I am a licensed attorney in the state of Texas as well as the state of New York. I've been practicing for nearly 20 years. I've practiced criminal law, also disability law, also workers' compensation and insurance defense. I've worked in the workers' compensation space as an attorney, and I've also presided over workers' compensation cases in the state of Texas as well, with the Texas Department of Insurance. Workers' compensation is a niche area. And in the state of Texas, there are limited practitioners, both on the plaintiff side and also the insurance defense side, representing the various carriers. And also, it's also a small judiciary. And so the players are very familiar with each other. And so it's a small space, it's an important space. And I'm just glad to be here today to take part in this conversation. This is just a conversation, and any advice that I give, there's no legal advice that's being given, and just sort of a conversation with experts in the risk management space regarding the transportation industry. So thank you for having me.
All right, well, great. Thank you so much for the introduction. And um, why don't we go ahead and start out with, talking about what workers' comp is. Maybe from the perspective of, you know, uh, well, just to start with what workers' comp is.
Okay. Well, workers' compensation is it's a state regulated insurance program is really what it is in a nutshell. It's regulated through an administrative agency, which means that it was created by the legislature. Again, I'm here in the state of Texas, and anything that I discuss regarding workers' compensation is really specific to the state of Texas. Typically, an injured worker will receive a portion of their lost wages. in terms of workers' compensation, you asked, what does it cover? So it covers lost wages, generally compensating an injured worker up to 70% of their average weekly wage. Of course, that varies. That rule is a little different for our first responders, but I know here in this trucking space, we're not dealing with too many first responders, but I did want to mention that distinction. However, one thing that is clear across the board, in addition to lost wages, any injured worker who is deemed to have experienced a compensable injury, which means that that injury was sustained in the course scope of that person's employment, they also will receive lifetime treatment for that compensable injury. Also, in addition to, again, the medical bills and also the payment, there are also death benefits and burial benefits. I know that's extreme, but that's a reality that we have to consider when we think about risk and protection for ourselves, our business, and our families. So, of course, those death benefits will go towards our beneficiaries who would be left behind. And not to go into detail, but the question was, what does workers' compensation cover in terms of the benefits? Again, the percentages, they change, but also in terms of the duration does change as well. There's what they call temporary income benefits, which you can receive for compensable injury while prior to receiving or reaching what they call maximum medical improvement and receiving an impairment rating from a doctor. There are impairment income benefits, which after a doctor said, this is the specified injury, this person has reached maximum medical improvement, and you receive what they call a whole body impairment for your body, you get that amount for each 1 week per the rating, 3 weeks, I'm sorry, per the
Mm-hmm.
rating. Example, if you have a 5% rating, well, then you'd get for 15 weeks because 5 times 3 is 15. And then, believe it or not, they have something that they call supplemental income benefits that even after
Mm-hmm.
you maximum medical improvement, if you cannot work and you have an impairment rating with at least 15%, you can continue to um, receive benefits, either if you are unable to work or even if you can work and you're looking for work and you have not been able to obtain work. And then they have what they call lifetime income benefits if you have certain impairments that by law you're become what they call eligible for lifetime income benefits, which means that you can receive benefits for the duration of your life. And then they have, again, those death benefits. Thank you. That was long, but that's what's covered.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, awesome. Some other things that also are part of the rehabilitation costs is another thing, and that those include like physical therapy, occupational therapy, and other forms of rehabilitation that work comp coverage from an insurance standpoint covers as well. Um,
Can I just say only if it's, and that's why you heard me say the medical treatment that is related to the compensable injury. But let's listen, it has to be what they call reasonable and necessary. So believe it or not, there
mhm.
are even disputes that take place in terms of where there's certain treatment that that an injured worker may receive. And if it is not deemed reasonable and necessary, those benefits will not be covered, those medical
Okay,
benefits or treatment.
okay, excellent, excellent. Um, So, there's a lot of players in this game as well, and just many of you may know or may not know, but some of the players that are in this space are the insurance companies, broker and agents such as ourselves, employers, employees, third-party administrators, um, service provider vendors, and of course the state commissions and boards. Um, I guess moving on to the next question, which we from a transportation, company, we kind of look at transportation and why is it so risky? I've got a couple of things that I think about from a physical demand standpoint. Can you maybe kind of talk to your thoughts on how each of these are potentially impacted by um, workers' comp from your perspective, like physical demands, um, you know, hazard materials, transporting hazard materials, environmental risk, high rates of injury, so on and so forth.
Right. So in terms of, and I can tell you that, so what you mentioned specifically are, I guess, some of the job hazards. However, in terms of specifically regarding risk, workers' compensation in the state of Texas is no fault. So it's not a
Yes.
matter of, it's no fault. And of course, regarding hazards, you can have what they call a physical injury. And so injury within Texas is defined as physical harm to the structure of the body, but also you can have mental harm as well. And then there's also what they call occupational risk and disease. So, example, trucker A gets into an accident on December 31st of 2023. We know that date of injury because he
Hmm.
had that accident and he obtained these injuries as a result of that at work accident or that accident if he was in the course and scope. But then there are what they call occupational hazards or occupational disease. So there are certain injuries that are associated with and that may be born out of a person's job. And under that, the question becomes, when did the person know and or reasonably believe that they sustained this injury? Because it's not something physical. It could be a diagnosis. It could be various things associated with the job itself. But let me just tell you, on its face, workers' compensation is the same across the board. However, there's a distinction, something that's distinctly different. When we talk about in the transportation space specifically, there's this whole distinction regarding, is a driver an employee, or are they
Hmm.
an owner operator, which means that they are the employer, or an employee for that company for which they're carrying a load for. I can tell you that within the state of Texas, there are bright line rules, but yeah, there are bright line rules, but then there are certain disputes that take place within the dispute resolution process in the court. So most owner operators generally they're independent contractors. So most of them
Hmm.
are generally not an employee, as I said, of that company for which they're carrying that load for. But one thing I would say to the owner operators, believe it or not, you can that's something that you can have in your agreement, right? To be covered
Hmm.
by that corporation. So it doesn't always happen. It could happen. And then just because you say that I am an independent contractor doesn't make it so. The court is going to look at, well, no matter how you identified this particular individual, you say they are an independent contractor, but let's look at what we have. Is there an agreement? Are you determining the hours that this person works? Are you providing the tools of this individual? Are you providing the way they perform their job? So those are going to look at some of the things that the court is going to look at, because then if you're directing what, the when, and the how, well, you're looking more like an employer than,
Hmm.
because you have some control, right? So that's something, I think that's something that's sort of unique to the transportation injury and or space when we talk about this risk management. And also, again, what happens if you are no longer able to work? That's another risk, because there's risk to your family in terms of your home from a financial standpoint. Who's going to pay for those medical bills and things like that? So again, that's another risk and a consideration that um, cannot be overlooked. And one thing I can just tell you, that when I was an administrative law judge, I remember one distinct case where the claimant, that's what the person who, the injured worker, before they're deemed to be an injured worker, they are a claimant. And so that particular claimant, you can go in terms of I guess, being in the course and scope of your employment, you can go in and out of the course and scope of employment. Now, this particular individual, it was horrible. He got hit by a train. He was walking across a train
Mm.
track. He parked his truck on one side and he was walking. And it was a video, and you can see him trying to run, run to outrun the train. But um, you know, he did survive. But in the end, unfortunately, he he was working, he was carrying a load, and he, what they call, deviated. He was in the course
Yeah.
and scope of his employment, but he deviated. And unfortunately, as horrific and as tragic as it was, he was deemed to be not in the course and scope of his employment. So, it's important, I think, to not, I think, I know, to have coverage, but also
Mhm.
familiar, what is covered and what is not covered. So again, that's just another, I may have gone on too long, but that's.
No, no, excellent. So from the perspective of, you talked about the fact that in Texas it's optional, but it would behoove like the carriers to carry it. Um, what are your thoughts? With it not being, it's not a requirement in the state of Texas, but like in other states, truckers are obviously driving, they crossing state lines. There's this whole idea behind the kind of extraterritorial coverages and stuff like that. Can you kind of speak to like the varying state laws, or let's say, if an individual is not covered in the if a carrier has an option to have no coverage in the state of Texas, but he gets into an accident in another state that requires workers' comp coverage, you know, kind of what are some of the consequences of having no coverage in in the state of Texas, but um, one, and then also like as they are moving into different states where the requirement is uniquely different than the state of Texas, which doesn't require you to have workers' comp coverage, but may in that particular state.
Right. So I can only speak to the state of Texas, right? So, and
Okay.
let me go back. You said that it's true that, as we know, believe it or not, the state of Texas is the only state where workers' compensation coverage is not required. However, we know that there's always some exceptions, right?
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of when we come talk about, mainly we're talking about not required. It's for private corporations, private entities.
Right.
But in terms of public employers, we're talking about the
Right.
cities. We're talking about the state agencies.
State. Right.
Yeah, and the
There's a
university.
requirement there.
Yes, it
Mhm.
is a requirement, but also in terms of buildings and constructions, in terms of for the public employers, it's also required, and then even for the motor bus companies and things like that,
Mhm.
it's not required. But again, if I know this is not that necessarily the space, but again, for those who, and maybe some municipalities do have um, relationships and with or maybe some truckers do have contracts. I don't know. They may with certain
Mhm.
state organizations or municipalities, but I can tell you, in order to get those government contracts, they're going to require you to have workers'
Of
compensation
course.
for yourself. So again, a reason why you should have it. And also, if you have any independent contractors and or subcontractors, they're generally required.
Right.
What are the consequences for not having workers' compensation insurance? Well, again, you don't have to have it except with some of the exceptions that I just mentioned for those public entities, and then there are a few more depending on what you are hauling. But I can tell you that to not have workers' compensation, you're known as what they call, the technical term is being a non-subscriber. However,
Mhm.
even if you are a non-subscriber, according to certain agencies, transportation agencies, and even in the state of Texas through TDI, again, that's the Texas Department of Insurance, you're still required to report any work injury if you have more than 5 employees, at least in Texas. So they're still governing you. There's still certain regulations. However, the protections are not there. So
Right.
that means that you are open. You are what they call going bare. That's the non-technical term. That's what they call it, going bare. So that means that you are open to the civil penalties, which means that you can be sued for personal injury. You can be sued for pain and injury. So those protections that you would have if you had workers' compensation, that's because you heard me mention the administrative agency of the Department of Texas Workers' Compensation. That is known as the exclusive remedy, except in when there's what they call gross negligence and or intentional acts and or omissions. So those are some of the consequences. Regarding maybe a trucker who may travel from one state to the other, if you have coverage from the state of Texas and you're traveling, generally you're governed by Texas. Except I can tell you there are certain areas in terms of like offshore and things like that. There's the Longshoreman Act. So there are other areas that may take you out of this workers' compensation space. But for the most part, if you are covered in Texas, you are covered. If that's a part of your job, if you're still performing your job in the course and scope of your employment, you are covered. In terms of what happens when you go to another state and you don't have it, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So again, you are open to, the laws of that jurisdiction, whatever they may be.
Yeah, that's excellent. Let me see. I think that's pretty much all the questions that I had. Lada, did you have any questions or kind of
Sure.
closing thoughts?
Sure. Let's go ahead into some now. I also want to remind our audience, if you're watching live, this is live Q&A. So this is your opportunity to drop some questions in the chat. I know workers' comp is really scary. It's very serious, definitely. I hope that is the takeaway everyone has, because it's not just what's going on right now, but you are talking about, the future of a worker's livelihood, of their life, literally, as we've heard, and even just their families. There's some lost wages and future stuff like that. So let me ask one of these questions here about the exclusions that are available. And then you, Steph, if you would kind of just walk people through just the process of applying for a workers' comp quote. What are some of the things that you'll need to be prepared to, give your insurance agent so that they can find a quote for you? And then, Robin, if you'll kind of even just talk about the importance of those pieces of information. Is that good? All right.
Yeah. I think in general the process is fairly simple. It's an application. It's an accord form. They're relatively short. And then once you get that information, it's just submitting it to the various carriers. There's a lot of them out there. But depending on your specific kind of situation, we tend to have a few that we like to deal with. But generally speaking, basically we go to the carrier. We have some raters that will rate different types of risk almost immediately, get you back some quotes in a day. And then depending on the size, of your business, if you have a fleet, may take a couple of days to get that information back.
Can you go a little more as far as the specifics, that the type of information you'll need, so that our viewers can be prepared in submitting the quote? Such an example is payroll and roll. Can you kind of talk about that?
Well, what do you mean from a payroll perspective?
That they'll need to have information about payroll and the roles, the duties.
Yeah. So basically, from you know from an application perspective, um, hold on one second. Let me just kind of look it up. From an application perspective, you just basically need to um, uh, I'm sorry, give me one second here. Yeah, from an application perspective, you would just basically need to have the information about your vehicles, um, your employees, the amount of wages that you're paying them. Um, Let me see. Yeah, so wage information, vehicle information, um, basic information that deals with the liability, where you're located at, some many things along those lines, and then let's see. I think that's pretty much the specific areas that we need.
Correct. And so, Robin, can you talk about, again, just so people, as they're gathering this information to get the quote, why is it important to have the payroll as well as the definition of the role? You spoke, several times in speaking about the scope of their work. Can you explain that just a little bit for us so the people know that this is, in fact, important and not just us being nosy as insurance agents?
Why is payroll important? Is that the question?
Yes, ma'am. Payroll as well as the role in defining the duties of your workers.
So it is important to define the duties of your workers because, for one thing, you want to make sure you are properly classified. Because if you are not properly classified, you can find yourself um, unprotected, maybe where you think you're protected and you are not. Um, Also, in terms of the importance of payroll, that's how you heard me mention what we call the AWW, that is the average weekly wage. That's going to determine how much, if a worker is injured, that's going to determine how much he or she is required to receive weekly. And so it's not just about working, because if you are an injured worker and you are working, but you're not able to do your previous work, but you are able to do some kind of work and you're working, well, if you're making less than your average weekly wage, but you are working, you would still then be entitled to additional funds, benefits in terms of monetary benefits, income benefits, because are based on your average weekly wage. So what determines your average weekly wage? That wage statement, payment and things like that. That is why that is materially important. Because if it's not something you want the judge to come up with, um, because then they start looking at other individuals. There are two other standards. So you want to have it based on what you have earned. That's one thing in terms of payment. But yes, did that answer the question?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you. And then go ahead, Yusuf.
I was just going to say, just real quick, just in terms of the rating, each one of the different types of uh, occupations that we have a different rate, from each one of the states. So the rating is also really important to get that into the NAICS code. Kind of determines that's some of the information that's on the application as well, the state rating worksheet. Um, and so, yeah, Ms. Burgess is absolutely right about that. Um, in terms of making sure you have the correct information on the rating information.
All right, so we have one question here. What if you only hire 1099s? I know you spoke a little bit about this, Robin, but if you wouldn't mind just reiterating, how does a workers' comp policy, when you're hiring true 1099s, how would that impact how the policies work and those type of things?
Right. I unfortunately, I have to apologize. I won't get into that because the reality is that a 1099 may be an indication of something, but it is not the indication because you're looking at the totality of the circumstances. So there may be other things that are going on. I've had a case. You get a 1099, but they're paying for medical, or they may be paying for something else. So that alone is not really dispositive. You have to look at the entire totality of the circumstances to make a determination to clearly and accurately identify um, that that individual in terms of are they an employee or an independent contractor.
Look, we're so glad you said that. Look, it had to come from your mouth because this is what we're constantly reminding people. Just because you kind of hear it on social media, or again, you're just thinking you want to take a shortcut because you're not confident of how to structure something, that the default is everybody's doing their own thing. And that's really, to be considered. There's certain, like as you mentioned, certain times where that is the case, but it's not like by a overwhelming default of, as you said earlier, ignorance, excuses you from following policies and procedures. So I just really want to hone that in, because as many people are watching this channel to learn, as a startup trucking business, what do I do? As a scaling trucking business, what are some considerations I need to make and seriously take? How you treat your human capital, and just knowing that it's more than just a wage situation. It's more than just taxes, is very, very important. And that's, the top. So as a final takeaway, and thank you so much for both of your time and coming on here. We have some people that they're kind of watching, but they hadn't asked any specific questions. So this is your time. Last round for for Q&A. Please drop those questions if you have one, while we have these valued guests in front of you, able to answer the questions right here on the spot. But in kind of closing, both Robin and Yusuf, can you tell us a little bit of what you would like our audience to take away from this conversation? What are the things that you had said and mentioned that in your line of work, the things that you've actually seen happen? What do you want to kind of really drive home here? We'll go with Robin first.
Okay,
Is that
go ahead, Robin.
okay?
Okay, so I just want to say, and I know just what I said was ignorance of the law is no excuse, so it is no excuse. But I just wanted to point out that when it comes to accidents, I believe that the state of Texas leads the way in terms of trucking accidents, and I believe that they are more than twice ahead of the second place finisher, which would be the state of California. So, and also in terms of the World Health Organization has indicated that, I know not just trucks, but when we talk about motor vehicle accidents, every 26 seconds, a person is killed in a motor vehicle accident. So that's undefined. And I just say that to say that this is a hazardous job. You're not just sitting, and plus you're subject to the will and conditions of other people, and there are other variables that are involved. So the big thing I would say is, just as we said in terms of not being protected, the loose term is that going bare. Just as though you wouldn't leave your house with no clothes on, uncovered, unprotected. You don't want to do the same thing when you're dealing with your business, your life, and your family. Risk management is very important. And so I just wanted to basically share that. The numbers are the numbers, the facts are the facts. And you just want to make sure that in the unlikely event that something were to happen in terms of an accident, because we never plan on it, but you can plan for it. So I just wanted to share that.
I like that. That's really good. And planning for it, I think, is really the key. It is a physically demanding industry. It's a physically demanding workspace. There's a lot of long driving, lifting of heavy objects. Sometimes it can be physically challenging to work in some of the environments that you're working in. And as Robin said, there's a high injury rate because of a lot of accidents between Texas and the state of California. That's very true. I think overall, risk management is the key. Because what it does is it helps you to kind of risk management and safety. I think those two really go hand in hand, as it really helps you to drive down your total cost of insurance, both from the auto liability for the trucks, as well as work comp costs when you're looking at your EMOD. And so I think that what I would take away from this is really, to really, it could be kind of intimidating from, I guess from the an employer's or company standpoint, but make sure you have a conversation with your attorney, your independent attorney, and to talk about the specialization or different types of risks that you might encounter from a workers' compensation standpoint by crossing state lines. Make sure you have a conversation with your insurance advisor to make sure you look at your insurance policies to ensure that you meet all of the state requirements as well as your business requirements. And then if you can make sure you I would really encourage people to kind of write it down, have a some form of uh, some form of like compliance book if you could, that really kind of writes, speaks to all of your safety practices and your risk management for your business. And once you codify it in writing, begin to implement that in, from a practice standpoint, because what you're effectively doing is building a culture of safety and risk management for yourself and for your company as it grows for all the employees that become a part of it. So those would be my lasting words.
I had my mute on. I was looking for it. Sorry. Thank you again so much, both of you, for your time. I didn't see any other questions, but this is going to be in rotation on YouTube. Of course, people like to kind of uh, soak all this in. We have Yusuf's contact information streaming across the top. He'll be your best connect if you have additional questions for Ms. Robin. And so thank you so much for watching, and you guys have a wonderful and blessed day. Talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye bye.
And end.